Welcome back to our channel, where we explore the eerie and unexplained. In tonight's video, we have 4 chilling stories from the world of healthcare. These aren't your ordinary ghost stories. Each one takes place in hospitals and nursing facilities, where life and death often walk side by side. From mysterious apparitions to unsettling encounters with the unknown, these stories come from healthcare workers who have experienced the supernatural while caring for their patients. Turn off the lights, settle in, and prepare to be haunted by what lurks in the night. Story number 1. I worked as a CNA in a nursing facility with 2 wings. I was usually scheduled to work in the North Wing with Nurse Mary. Most of our patients were long-term, but a smaller group was there for short-term rehab. Like every nursing home or nursing facility, this one was also haunted. Staff who had worked there for a while often talked about a shadowy figure seen in the physical therapy room late at night. Luckily for me, I hadn't encountered anything yet. I was still kind of new and hadn't experienced anything at all. One night, I was working with Nurse Mary. The nurse working in the South Wing was Mark. Mark was a young, skinny man with a bald head and glasses. That particular night, I was sitting at the computer at the nurse's station after checking on all of my patients. Mary had just finished her 9 p.m. med pass and came back to the nurse's station with her med cart. She parked the cart in front of the station and sat down next to me. Then Mary whispered, "Hey Jen, did you notice something about Mark?" "No, why?" I asked. "Did you notice that sometimes Mark has eyebrows, but sometimes he doesn't?" Mary whispered. I didn't know what she meant. In fact, I'd never really paid attention to Mark's brows because he was always wearing glasses. Later, I went over to chat with the staffs at the South Wing station. I looked closely at Mark and noticed that he had no eyebrows. His glasses kind of hid his brows anyway if he did have some. I thought it was strange how Mary paid attention to such a small detail. Shortly after that, I hadn't seen Mark. I thought he might have gone on vacation or something. One night I was at work. I put one of my patients to bed, and she asked if I could warm up some prune juice for her. She wanted to drink it before going to sleep because it helped with her bowel movements in the morning. She hadn't gone to the bathroom for 2 days and felt a bit backed up. I left my patient's room and walked to the pantry to warm up the prune juice. As I was walking towards the pantry, I saw Mark come around the corner and go into the pantry. When I got to the pantry, I opened the door, ready to greet Mark, but when I opened the door, no one was there. The pantry was small, and there was no place for him to hide. I quickly heated up the prune juice and went back to my patient's room. I was a bit freaked out. Later that night, I asked Nurse Mary about Mark because I hadn't seen him for a while. Mary told me that Mark had been battling cancer for a while and had passed away not too long ago at home. His wife had decided to put him under hospice care when things got really bad during his last hospital visit. I was freaking out and scared, so I told Mary about what I saw, and we both got even more freaked out that night. We didn't turn off the hallway lights until our shift ended at 11 p.m. Sometimes I wonder why people still come to work even after they've passed. Story number 2. When I was still a resident working the night shift, I had an experience that still creeps me out whenever I think about working in a hospital setting. One night, around 10 p.m., a nurse called me and said that a patient named Shelton was asking to go downstairs for a smoke. To be honest, I didn't know what the patient looked like because I hadn't seen him yet. I was just covering for the night. After quickly reviewing the patient's chart, I realized that this patient had lung cancer. I told the nurse to inform the patient that he couldn't go outside for a smoke due to his condition. Just as I said that, I heard the patient in the background saying, "I don't care what the doctor said. You guys cannot hold me against my will. All I want is to go for a quick smoke, and I'll come right back. That's it. Why can't I go for a smoke? A black man is being held against his will here at the hospital. Why can't a black man go for a quick smoke?" The patient seemed alert and oriented ×4, meaning he could make his own decisions. I told the nurse that if he wanted to go out for a smoke, they should have him sign an AMA form and let him go. For those who don't know, AMA stands for Against Medical Advice. It's a form patients sign when they choose to leave the unit against medical advice, so we're not liable if anything happens to them while they're off the unit. I spoke briefly with the patient, and after he understood the risks, he agreed to sign the AMA form. After that, we hung up. I assumed the nurse had Shelton sign the form and let him go outside for a quick smoke. Shelton was in his mid-50s and had already made himself a DNR, meaning do not resuscitate. After that night, I had a day off, and then returned to work on the night shift. Around 11 p.m., I received a call from a nurse asking me to come pronounce a patient who had just passed away. I told her I'd be there shortly, and we hung up. I took the elevator to the 5th floor. When I got out of the elevator, there was a patient in a hospital gown standing in the elevator room. He asked me if I knew where the 5th floor family lounge was. I pointed him to the right side of the hallway. I went to the nurse's station and was informed that the patient who had passed away was in room 11. His name was Shelton. I walked over to room 11 and opened the curtain. His wife and son were still at the bedside, and I told them I was there to pronounce the patient. When I looked at Shelton, I realized it was the same man I had seen in the elevator room, asking for directions to the family lounge earlier. That's probably the creepiest experience I've ever had with the unknown in my field of work. As a story narrator and as a nurse, I always have QuickClot in my emergency kit everywhere I go. I always have them, and most of the time, they ended up expired, and I have to get new ones. Not having to use them is actually a good thing. However, the one time I have to use a QuickClot was when my friend and I went fishing, and his hand got stabbed by a catfish. He was bleeding badly, but since it's a small puncture, I applied the QuickClot, and it helped stop the bleeding. As a nurse, I highly recommend QuickClot. Link is in the description. Thank you. Story number 3. Back in the fall of 2020, I was working as a traveling nurse and got a contract with an old hospital in a small town. The energy in that emergency department was just different. I don't know how to explain it. Every time I worked, I felt this negative energy, as if something was about to happen. I've been to many hospitals before, but that was the only one that made me feel that way, and I still don't know why. One night, I was looking for a specific central line for a doctor. The unit clerk told me that if I couldn't find it in our clean storage room or med room, it might be in the central supplies room. But at that time of night, no one was working in the central supplies room, so we had to go find things ourselves. The unit clerk wrote down the code for the central supplies room and gave it to me. I walked through the empty hallway and found the room. I punched in the code and went inside. After about 5 minutes, I found what the doctor needed, so I headed back out and closed the door. As I was walking back, I heard someone clearly calling my name from behind. I heard it twice, like, "Jason! Hey, Jason!" I turned around, but no one was there. It creeped me out because at the end of the hallway was a door that led to the cold room, the place where the hospital stored deceased patients. Another creepy encounter happened during my last week at that hospital. One night, around 3 a.m., a code blue was called for a patient with respiratory distress in room 6. I stopped charting, got up, and rushed over to room 6. A lady walked in front of me, heading to room 6 as well. She was wearing a white coat, like a doctor. I followed her from a short distance behind, and I saw her open the door to room 6, but she didn't leave the door open. When I reached the door and opened it, she was gone. Inside the room was just the nurse performing chest compressions on the patient in the bed. The doctors and nursing staffs coded the patient for 45 minutes, but eventually had to call it. The patient wasn't going to make it. Afterward, I asked the nurse if she had seen a lady in a white coat come into the room before I did, and she said she hadn't. It was just a creepy experience overall. I love the staff at that hospital, but I'll never go back to work there again. Story number 4. I work as a CNA on the night shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. on the oncology floor. I had a patient named Betty. Betty was very sick with colon cancer and had an ileostomy bag. It's like a colostomy bag, but an ileostomy produces much more watery output since it's created from the small intestine. This meant her bag needed to be emptied multiple times per shift. Betty was a widow who had lost her husband to heart disease several years back. The only family member she had nearby was her sister. Her children lived out of state. Betty's sister would often call to check on her. Since Betty was a DNR, do not resuscitate, we didn't make her wear one of those heart monitors. One night around 12 a.m., I went to check on Betty and empty her ostomy bag before she fell asleep. I was by her bedside, emptying her bag into a container, when I thought I saw movement by the window. I looked up but didn't see anyone. I finished emptying the bag and sealed it back up to prevent leakage. Then I saw movement again by the window, but when I looked, no one was there. Betty said, "You can see my husband too. He's always a little shy." I told her I thought I saw movement, but no one was there. I went into the bathroom to dump the container into the toilet. After that, I told Betty goodnight and left the room. We make rounds to check on our patients every hour during the shift. Sometimes, just a quick peek inside the room is enough since sleep is very important for them. I still remember, around 4 a.m., I had just finished my rounds and was sitting at the nurse's station when the phone rang. It was Betty's sister. She said she had 2 missed calls from Betty's room and was wondering if everything was okay. I told her that Betty was fine and still sleeping. We hung up, and at around 4:30 a.m., the phlebotomist came in and said she thought Betty had expired because she was unresponsive. The nurse and I went in to check, and Betty had indeed passed away. She was still warm under the blanket, but there was no breathing and no heartbeat. Betty had just died. The nurse called Betty's sister to inform her. According to her sister, she had received 2 missed calls from Betty's room around 2 a.m. Maybe Betty knew she was leaving. Her sister was very understanding and glad that Betty was no longer suffering. That's all for this video. Thank you for making all the way through and supporting my stories. Have a wonderful day or night.